Okay, so it's completely dry and it's time to move on to this little area in here. We're gonna go same colors. I'll just kind of mix the two of them together. It doesn't really matter so much because it's a dark area. And I'm gonna be cooling that color down, cooling that area down, I should say, with my burnt umber and my cobalt blue. Got those two. That's a nice, see how that just grays down, burnt umber. You can also get that gray by using ultramarine blue, and the burnt umber works well. I think yeah, let's add a little bit more blue. Now that's going into my puddle here. I don't really want that. Just dab it out. Get a fresh paper towel. And go like that. Turn it around. And grab some more raw sienna because I just soaked up all of the one I had there. And there we go. I still have my mineral violet there, so I'll be using some of that. Let's just get that going. Now I'm thinking, what can I add to this? I don't know. Yeah, I guess that burnt umber and cobalt can get that puddle even grayed down further without turning it green, and that's what I want. So get some more of that mixed up here. Burnt umber. And we're going to approach it the same way. Getting this wet. And going past where I want it necessarily to be. Just so it has room to flow outward. And we're going to come right under the chin. Chinny chin chin. And up and around. So let's just grab our colors and plop it into the center more than up to the edge of where the water is that I put down. I want it to spread and soften, remember. In the areas that are going to be lighter, I'll just come around that. And I just dabbed off my brush, rinsing it and pulling along those edges to soften. There is a white area here, and I'm going to come up a little closer to that side area. And I think I want to just soften that real quick. I don't want to go into too much detail there quite yet. Need a little bit more burnt umber in this. It's a little too gray for me, for what I'm seeing in here. A little bit more brown, a little bit deeper. And here's a brush that I haven't used yet. In this painting is this Filbert Grainer. And I'm just going to flick a little bit into that chin, just a touch, just to break that up a little bit. I'm going to also quickly coming along there because that was drying out. A little bit of this violet in here I think would be kind of nice. Rinsed my brush, and I'm just gonna kind of drag that into that fur there. I like the softness in there. This is a little too hard of an edge right here, so I'm gonna get my damp brush. I almost let that sit too long. And there's a line in the paper, but I think we'll be okay. And let's see. Let's go into the crevice here. Rinse my brush, and I'm going to come and soften that. Flick some of that into the fur so it doesn't form too much of a hard edge. I took all of it away though, so let's go back and add a little bit more. A little bit of violet. Just drop in a couple of little touches of that burnt umber. And let it spread. And again, I don't want to mess with this too much. Let it dry and soften is a much better idea, especially in this nice soft fur feeling that I've got going on. I do feel like this filbert might be effective for a little bit of texture. All right. Good, good, good. So let's let that area dry. Coming over here. So we'll work on that side while this is drying. So kind of moving back and forth a little bit just so I can keep going here. I think I'm going to use this Utrecht number 4. These are Sablettes. They're also a nice brush, good price point. Find them at Blick. I'm going to get this area all wet in here. This is where I see more of the tan. And I'll just go ahead and start dropping it in. Soften along there. It's not going to be too bright over here, but it is a little bit in the shadow, so pick that up. Kind of give this a lost edge over here. Grab a little bit of burnt sienna and put that in there with my burnt, or with my raw sienna. I'm just going to kind of touch my brush in a dappling kind of way so it doesn't completely cover that blue, but I want it soft and a little bit of that color in there. I'm gonna come right up here. I want that just softening out into the side here. I don't want there to be a hard line forming. Tiniest little bit of shadow in there. Again, trying not to get too detailed. It's really hard. There's a, oh, I like that. I like the pink, or the Quinacradone Magenta in there. That's what I was looking for. A little bit more of that rather than the umber. Let's lift some of that out. It's still wet, so I can just put my brush into it and pull it away. There we go. Okay, now if I mess with that too much more, I'm gonna lose what I'm going for. So I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna come around here. Okay. Yeah, I think coming in with a little bit of that teal. I'm just softening that. Okay, I'm gonna leave that because it's kind of not what I'm wanting to see, but I think if I let it dry, then I can do some lifting and that'll be more effective than trying to keep on working with it now. I'm gonna come over here to the ear. For some reason I want to go to the ear. There's some of that Cobalt Teal on the top there. Let's do that. And then come inside the ear. Just a slight little bit. A little bit of that warm color in there. right, I'm going to move over to the rock that is underneath this guy, and it's very light, so I'm going to just treat it the same way with a little bit more shadow under the fur there. Just getting it wet, and I'm going to come all the way past that line there. But I'm just going to go with like the very subtle, a little bit of blue, a little bit of gray, a little bit of teal, kind of all in the same color scheme actually. Let's go with some of the, my paint's kind of dry. Get some of that, what is it? I can't paint and talk at the same time. It is Magenta. So I'm going to come right up into, like that, a little bit more kind of purpley gray under here as we come to this rock. It's going to help that fur stand out a little bit more under here. Let's get a little touch more in there while it's still wet. And maybe just a smidge in here while it's still wet. Soften that, and I'll do that quite a bit because if I soften the edge, and I've probably said this more than I need to, if I soften it, I can come back and I don't have a hard line to deal with. So it gives me a chance to kind of think a little bit. If I had a hard edge, I would be kind of stuck. And here in this area, the fur is kind of just flowing into that, so you don't really see what's going on. It's like a lost edge, which I like. Lost edge over here, lost edge over here, here, and pretty much over here too. I've got a pencil line there that kind of interferes with that look, but most part it is a lost edge in those areas. I'm going to come in with a little bit more of that violet gray very softly and leave an edge there, or not an edge necessarily. I'm not coming right up to the edge because I want that white kind of glow. And I'm going to soften that. And soften that. I like that area a lot, so I'm going to leave that. And we've got to figure out what to do with that ear eventually. So while this other stuff is drying, I'm going to take my Winsor & Newton Bright and see if I can't just scrub out a little bit of that. And it's bringing up some of the paper with it. It's because that's a staining color. I'm not able to quite lift it back to the white of the paper. That's okay though. It is quite okay because this is turned away from the light, and I'm gonna actually wait for it to dry. That was probably not a good idea because I want to do what I've done with the rest of this, dropping in the color into the already moistened area, but I don't want that to go all the way to the paint to go all the way to the edge. I want to leave some of that. So I'll let that dry for just a second. And let's see, what can I do? Cobalt blue. How about burnt sienna and cobalt blue? Just a little bit different. A little bit more orangey than the burnt umber. I'm gonna get that wet as I did before, but this time I'm gonna use my smaller brush. Just play around with that and see what happens. A little bit more cobalt blue in there, and I'm gonna I think I want to wait a little bit longer on this because I want this also to be a lost edge. So I might have been a little bit jumping ahead there with that area. So let's just stop what we're doing. Okay, so let's see. Let's try up in here and see. Maybe that'll be the spot. But I want a different brush. We'll go with this Heritage number 6. It doesn't have quite the pointy tip, and that's what I want. I want a little bit softer. I'm just gonna come in and deepen this. Maybe lift out a little bit of, maybe, but I think actually, nah, we're gonna do more of that in the end with gouache. We're gonna put some detail in there with that. So I'm gonna leave that. And I think I'm gonna just sit back for a minute and see what I would like to do next. Probably I'm gonna go ahead and add this foreground so I can get a better idea of the overall picture of this before I continue on detailing. That'll give me a better idea of the values and how much more I need to do. So let's take a step back and think about this for a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to work on the foreground now, and I'm going to go with some warmer darks because this is more in the foreground. Even though it's shadowed, it still has some warmth to it. So I'm going to start by mixing up some darks, and I've got Ultramarine Blue Deep. Let me just bring that over here. So this is Ultramarine Deep, which is a Holbein color. There's all kinds of different ultramarines. There's French ultramarine, there's ultramarine light, there's just plain ultramarine. And I've always gone with this for the most part because it is pretty dark and I can get some good darks mixed up there. So also Hooker's Green being a very good dark, I can add that to my ultramarine and get a nice deep rich color there. And then there's the decision of what to add to that. Do I add burnt umber? Do I add burnt orange? I think burnt orange might make it a little greener. Burnt umber might make it a little bit darker, more grayed down. I don't know. I'm just going to keep on mixing it up and figure it out as I go, I guess. I could add a little bit of that right there, which is Alizarin, which the three Ultramarine, Hooker's Green, and the red added in there make a nice dark too. Those are very dark, so they're going to make a good dark. I do feel I need a little bit more of the deep. But I do want to have a little bit of the browns ready to go because I want to drop that in. Not necessarily mix it up on my palette, but I like the direction this is going. I just feel like I need more. More of that alizarin. It's just getting lost in there now, but that's fine. So that hopefully is enough. There's not a big amount of space, so I'm gonna make the executive decision and just jump right in. Underneath this guy's arm, paw, whatever you want to call it, there's some, it looks like shale kind of to me. And actually I want to add a little bit of just cobalt in there to start. A little bit of gray up into his paw. I did want that to be kind of lost edge in there, so I don't want to get too dark up in there right away, but I may add that as I go. This little area down below here is pretty dark. Get that nice and wet. And I think I just will start with this one little area here. I do like that. So there's a little bit of that burnt orange. I'm going to grab a little bit of burnt umber. Keep dropping in those colors. I'm not mixing them on the palette. I don't feel like that's going to be dark enough. So I need to get real aggressive with how much paint I'm pulling in. Even grabbing more color as I go. Usually I want to mix up my puddle and not have to think about it, but in this case it's kind of like, oh no, it's not dark enough. You better grab more color or you're going to lose the chance for the things to blend in. Just bring that water over so it softens. I'm going to grab a little bit more cobalt blue, dab that in right up there, add some burnt umber to that to gray it down. Come up on the tip of my brush as I'm getting close to the fur here. A little bit more brown in there. Kind of like the way that fur is just kind of disappearing into that area. Get a little bit more blue there. I'm going to add some more paint down here. Feels like it was separating from the edge of the paper too much. A little bit more burnt umber in there. And I think my little filbert grainer here, I can just soften that and get a little up into that paw. So it's not such a hard line. I'm just flicking that with my fingers. Now before this dries too much, I'm going to come right next to that, soften that line a bit, and we're going to do the same thing over here. Got to be really quick when you're doing this kind of painting, because if you're moving around like I am, you're kind of moving from here to here. If you get too caught up in one little area, you're likely to lose track. Like in here, I want to make sure that all of this is coming up to his fur. So I didn't get it wet all the way up there. I just want to get the tip of my brush and flick it up into the fur. Grabbed a little bit more paint. And I am keeping in mind too, thinking about these are rocks. There's irregularities in there. Back to my filbert. Just flicking very tip of that. Maybe even losing an edge right in here would be kind of nice. It's still wet, so it's going to soften a bit as I add some paint in there, if I can keep my hand out of it. Rinsed my brush, and I'm just going to soften a little bit in there. And at this point, I'm just going to let it dry. So now I want to come around the face area. If you look at this and squint, like I'm doing, you can see that there's a pretty big shape of that just white. And then around it, you've got the blue. So there's a big shape of blue, and then just some little areas of lighter, but this is pretty light. I mean, that's the lightest part of the face. So I'll be thinking of those big shapes as I paint, and then try to drop in, or my goal is to drop in, and I can go right over that eye. A little bit of variety of color, because that's going to make it more interesting. So I'm getting that wet, and I'm going to come just right up in here. I can come back later with that. Just right in here, just so all of that is pretty soft. Right under there. So let's start with the Ultramarine. Maybe a little bit of the teal. This is going to be pretty bold. It might seem a little bit dark at first, but we want it to be dark enough we want it to be dark enough to be believable. So I'm going to soften this too right there. I'm going to come into that little area right here. A little bit more of the blue. And let that just kind of spread and soften. Soften that edge. I'm going to soften just a little right there. Soften a little. One thing I should be able to lift some of this too after it dries. Soften in there. And I'm going to come and get this a little bit wetter. Had a little bit of time where it was drying, so I want it to be wetter than it was. A bit more in there. A little bit deeper in there. I'm just touching in. Soften. I'm going to come right down into that muzzle. Rinsed my brush and I'm softening. I want to save that area so it doesn't get a hard line. Now I'm going to want to let this dry because there's going to be some separation and granulating that's going to happen in here. French Ultramarine does granulate a little bit more. That's one thing I found out about it when researching a little bit. What's the difference between Ultramarine and French Ultramarine? They're pretty close to the same color, but it said when I looked it up that French Ultramarine is the more, let's see if I can remember what it said. Actually don't remember what it said precisely. I'm going to have to look that up and get back to you on it. Okay, so I'm just going to leave that pretty much. Actually, right under the muzzle there is a nice little glow. So I'm going to add that in. That was a little bit of raw sienna and a little bit of permanent yellow deep, I think that was, that I just touched in. So there was a little bit of a glow kind of reflecting back into his muzzle, the lower chin area. So let's let this dry and start adding some of the details in the face. But before I'm going to stop. I'm going to come up here because there is ever so slightly some raw sienna coloring up in there. And that with a little bit of the Quinacradone Magenta. All right, and I was going to do this before, and then I stopped and thought better of it because I had wet the whole ear. And that, oops. Let's take that up. And I wanted to leave the edge a little bit lighter. It's still not as light as I wanted it to be because I was not careful or when I was doing that background. But again, I can bring in the gouache. I'm going to go with this more grayed down because that is away from the light. Okay, so let's let that sit and dry.